Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to thank both of you for being here. Commissioner Koskinen, let me just thank you up front for your response to my letter of May 28th. And I think this is really important that you're going to change the policy that you have in terms of providing tax returns to those who find themselves to be victims of identity theft. And what prompted me to write you that letter is I'm sure many of my colleagues could share similar stories. But one was a woman, the Weeks family, and they learned last year when they went to file their tax return, a month after their 7-year-old daughter had been killed in a car crash, that in fact someone had claimed their deceased child as a dependent. In fact, what the IRS told Mrs. Weeks was that their deceased child's Social Security number had been used 3 times. And then she had a really hard time getting any more information. She couldn't get any information from the IRS. And similarly, in terms of who used it, what happened, even getting copies of the returns and trying to understand what happened. Another family I had, after having surgery and complications that prevented one of the members of the family from returning to work for 3 months, she filed their tax returns and this family did as soon as they could, and they really needed the return because they were in jeopardy of losing their home. And what they found out when they filed their return, the wife discovered that someone had already filed a tax return with using her Social Security number, and she was told it would take her 4 to 6 months to process any kind of refund because of this identity theft. And they became delinquent on their home and faced foreclosure. And this was one where my staff was able to intervene and help them in time to save their home. And I wanted to use these real stories because your response to me is very important. What we heard earlier today from Mr. Michael Casper, and perhaps you had a chance to hear what he had to say as a victim of identity theft that testified before this committee, is that the process of not being able to get a return or information it makes these victims, obviously puts them in a worse position, because Mr. Casper went through a long process, finally had to pay $50 and got information that allowed him to go to the bank and to try to protect himself, and actually resulted in finding out who did this. So what I wanted to understand is, with this new procedure, how long do you think it will take to put this in place? And will all victims of tax-related identity fraud be able to request copies of their fraudulent returns? And can you give me a sense, I have constituents coming to my office, do you have a sense of how big this problem would be in New Hampshire and across the country? And those are some of the first questions I have.
First of all, I appreciated your letter, and I was delighted that we were able to review the situation and remedy it. We hope to, in a very short period of time, have the new process up where we can redact any information that might look like it would be a violation of so-called 6103 and give taxpayers access to the false return so they can get an idea of exactly what it looked like and what they have to deal with. And we should be able to, as I say, have that system up and running within a matter of no more than a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, to be able to do that. But it is, and as I've said in other contexts, the access to get transcript is really just another manifestation of identity theft. These are criminals who already knew and had enough information to file a false return. What they were trying to do was get more information so they could file a better false return. As noted, the reason we can have stopped 3 million returns, suspicious returns at the door, is because we keep improving the sophistication of our filters, which detect anomalies. So if you can eliminate the anomalies, you're better off. But we continue to try to do whatever we can to help taxpayers. For instance, as I've said, the notification to the 104,000 who had data access, those letters are out. They should have those already in the next few days. But we need to, as quickly as we can, provide support to taxpayers. When this problem exploded 4 or 5 years ago, it would take us up to a year to be able to straighten out a taxpayer's account. We now have it down to an average of 120 days. Our goal really is to get it even to shorter than that as we go. It is a problem. We have IP pins in the hands of about 1.5 million taxpayers who've had fraudulent false returns filed. They're spread across the country. And again, it's an ongoing challenge for us. One of the issues we need to continue to do as much as we can, is develop filters at the back end to stop returns, but increasingly do authentication at the front end. And that's why we have this partnership with the private sector in the states. When I pulled them together 3 months ago, H&R Block, Intuit, and others, I said, purpose of this meeting is not for me to tell you what to do. The purpose of this meeting is to start a discussion where we can work together, the private sector, the states, and the IRS, to figure out how jointly we can do a better job of protecting taxpayers. Because there's, as you note with your cases, there's nothing more traumatic to an individual than to feel that their data has been violated, has been stolen. And it's not only the difficulty of getting a refund, 70% of people who file with us get refunds that you may need immediately, but it's that lack of certainty of where else is this information available.
Right, and that's why I think it's important that the taxpayer given as much information as possible to protect their own financial interests. And one of the things we heard from Mr. Casper, who was here, but it's also a similar experience that I've heard a lot about. In fact, Nina Olson, the taxpayer advocate, noted in her annual report that victims often must, quote, navigate a labyrinth of IRS operations and recount their experience time and time and again to different employees. And so Mr. Casper's experience was 4 to 5 different people waiting an hour or two on the phone for each. Has there thought been given to assigning one person when someone becomes an identity theft victim to that individual rather than, you know, calling back up again and being put it back sort of in?
It is a problem that we have been focused on. When we started, ID theft was spread around various 8 parts of the agency. We have now consolidated all ID theft issues, particularly for taxpayers, into one location so that they will actually be able to go one place and tell their story once. The taxpayer advocate, who I work with closely and I have great admiration for, and I have a disagreement about whether there should be a single individual. Because the problem with a single individual as opposed to a single entity is that if you call, they could be on vacation, they could be at lunch, they could be somewhere else. Most call centers, if you call any commercial enterprise and then call back, you don't get a name to talk to you, but what you do get when you call back is they know what your call is about. They have a record of what you said, and that's what a system we're building so that a taxpayer can call a special number for ID theft. They don't have to battle through the lack of service we're able to provide generally. And when they call the second time, if they have to, they won't have to repeat the story. The record of what their situation is will be readily available to the next available operator for them. And I think our experiences and the private sector experiences, that's a more efficient way to provide the service to taxpayers rather than for them to have to depend upon the location of a given individual. But the point that the taxpayer advocate raised initially was exactly right, that we cannot have taxpayers have to themselves navigate the various aspects of the IRS operations. And we're working to, in fact, as I say, consolidate that to give taxpayers one-stop shopping, as it were.
Thank you. I know my time has expired, and I'll stick around for another round when we get through our votes, but thank you.
Great.